The boy who was born to fly. Elijah Jackson was 16 years old, and he had never wanted anything more than the sky. While other kids collected sneakers and traded video games, Elijah collected something different: knowledge. He could identify a Boeing 777 by the sound of its engines alone. He could sketch the control schematics of a modern aircraft from memory. Every evening, he pressed his face against his bedroom window and watched planes carve silent lines across the sky, whispering to himself, "One day, that will be me." His bedroom told the whole story. Model planes hung from the ceiling. Posters of engine diagrams covered the walls. Flight simulator software ran long after midnight while his mother knocked on the door telling him to sleep. His father, David Jackson, a respected official at the Federal Aviation Administration, would quietly smile through the doorway, knowing that every late night brought his son one step closer to something real. It was David who had sparked the flame. On Elijah's 6th birthday, he arranged a secret tour at Dulles International Airport. Standing beneath the massive wing of a Boeing 777, little Elijah looked up with wide eyes and felt something shift deep inside him. A pull, an ache, a certainty. He pointed at the sky and said, "Dad, I want to go up there." David placed his hand on his son's small shoulder and said, "Then you will." Those 3 words became Elijah's foundation. Whenever doubt crept in, and it did, from classmates who laughed, from adults who raised their eyebrows at a young black boy dreaming of cockpits, David would appear at exactly the right moment. Others may doubt you, Elijah. Never doubt yourself. The sky will always be open for you. So when the Horizon Airlines Career Exploration Program announced its selection process, Elijah didn't hesitate. He spent weeks on his application essay, pouring into it every memory, every late night, every moment his father had believed in him before he could believe in himself. The competition was fierce, hundreds of candidates, all exceptional. Elijah won. The day the letter arrived, his hands shook too much to open it. It was David who tore the envelope, read the words, and broke into the widest smile Elijah had ever seen. "You did it, son." They held each other and cried, not just because of the acceptance, but because of everything it represented: years of sacrifice, of holding on, of refusing to shrink when the world suggested he should. That evening, Elijah laid out his clothes for the next morning. His guest ID badge sat on the nightstand, gleaming under the lamp. He stared at it for a long time. Tomorrow, he thought, everything begins. He had no idea how true that would turn out to be, just not in the way he imagined. The day everything fell apart. The pilot's lounge was quieter than Elijah expected. He sat in a cushioned chair, ID badge pinned to his chest, eyes fixed on a documentary about the history of commercial aviation playing on the screen across the room. Miss Reynolds from HR had settled him in before stepping out to handle an urgent matter. "Wait here," she had said warmly. "I'll be back in 20 minutes." Elijah was content. More than content, he was in awe. This was the room where real pilots sat between flights, the people he had studied, admired, dreamed of becoming. He didn't hear the door open. He only looked up when he felt it, a cold shift in the air, like a storm front moving in. Captain Rebecca Whitman stood in the doorway, 20 years of flying, 4 gold stripes on her shoulders. Eyes that swept the room and landed on Elijah with immediate suspicion. She didn't greet him. She didn't ask. "Who let you in here?" Elijah stood instinctively, his heart jumping. He kept his voice calm, polite, the way his father had always taught him. "Ma'am, I'm Elijah Jackson. I'm part of the career exploration program. Miss Reynolds brought me here. I'm just waiting for her to return." Whitman's expression didn't soften. It hardened. Career exploration. She said it like it was a joke. This is not a playground, and it is certainly not a place for someone like you. Before Elijah could respond, she stepped forward and snatched the badge from his neck. The strap snapped. She flipped it over, examined it briefly, then held it up like evidence at a trial. "Fake," she declared. "I knew it." The word hit Elijah like a physical blow. Fake. He hadn't moved. He hadn't touched anything. He had been watching television in a chair. And now, he was a criminal. Whitman raised her radio without hesitation. "Security to the pilot's lounge. We have an intruder in a restricted area using a counterfeit ID. This is a security breach." The room changed in an instant. Faces appeared at the doorway. Whispers spread like smoke. Eyes. So many eyes, all turning toward Elijah. He felt himself go cold. This was the most important day of his life. And it was collapsing around him in real time. He raised his hand, trying once more. "Ma'am, please, Miss Reynolds can confirm everything. She personally gave me this badge. I have done nothing wrong." But Whitman had already turned away, already building her case, already performing for the audience gathering at the door. "This is exactly how breaches happen," she announced to the room. "Someone who looks harmless walks into a restricted area with a convincing story." "We cannot afford complacency. Not here." People nodded. Some crossed their arms. Some pulled out phones. Elijah stood completely still, alone in a room full of people, his dream badge lying broken on the floor, standing in the fire. 2 security officers arrived within minutes. They entered the lounge with the faces of people who had already made up their minds. One was tall, broad-shouldered, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Elijah with practiced suspicion. The other stood by the door, one hand on his radio. "Young man," the tall one said, "you need to explain yourself. Immediately." Elijah had never felt smaller, but he kept his voice steady. "My name is Elijah Jackson. I'm enrolled in the Horizon Airlines Career Exploration Program. Miss Tanya Reynolds from HR brought me here personally this morning. She stepped out temporarily. I have not gone anywhere or touched anything." The officer glanced at Whitman. Whitman barely shrugged. "I've worked here 20 years. Students don't enter the pilot's lounge unsupervised. That badge is suspicious. Check it carefully, you'll see. It was enough." Doubt spread through the officers like a virus. "Hand over the badge and your ID." Elijah's hands trembled as he reached into his pocket. Around him, the crowd at the door had grown. Pilots. Ground staff. People with coffees and lanyards. Watching like this was something that happened every day. No one stepped forward. No one said, "Wait, let's hear him out." No one. Whitman pressed further, louder now, feeding the crowd. "Think about what this means. A young man, unaccompanied, in a restricted area with unverifiable credentials. We've been trained for exactly this scenario. We cannot assume innocence simply because someone seems harmless." More nods. More whispers. Elijah's eyes burned, but he refused to cry. He scanned every face for a trace of sympathy and found none. Then Whitman said the thing that broke something inside him. "Go ahead and call your father, though I'm sure your parents, probably working as janitors somewhere in this airport, won't be much help here. In fact, I'll make sure they're held accountable for allowing their son to cause disruption." The room went quiet in a different way now. Not the quiet of suspicion. The quiet of cruelty landing in open air. Elijah's jaw tightened. His nails pressed into his palms. He thought of his father, of everything David Jackson had built, of the late nights, the sacrifices, the steady hand on his shoulder. And he thought of what it meant that this woman, this decorated captain, had looked at the son of the FA administrator and seen nothing but a problem to be removed. He picked up his phone. His fingers barely worked. He dialed. Each ring stretched like a lifetime. Then, his father's voice. Warm, firm, immediate. "Elijah, what's going on?" And that was it. That was all it took. Every wall Elijah had been holding up cracked at once. "Dad," he managed. "I need you, please come." A pause. Then David Jackson's voice dropped into something low and certain, the tone Elijah had heard only a handful of times in his life. The tone that meant something was about to change. "Stay exactly where you are. Don't move. I'm coming." Whitman watched Elijah lower the phone and laughed softly, just loud enough. "Touching," she said. "I'm sure Dad will sort everything out." Elijah said nothing. He stood straight. He waited. When the room learned the truth. The announcement crackled through the security officer's radio without warning. "All units, a senior FA official is en route to the pilot's lounge. Stand by." The room shifted. Whitman frowned. "FA? For this?" She crossed her arms. "I'd love to see which official has nothing better to do than come down here for a teenage boy." She would find out in under 3 minutes. David Jackson walked through that door like a man who had walked through harder ones. Tall, measured. 4 senior FA officials flanked him, their expressions carved from stone. He didn't scan the room. He went straight to his son, placed both hands on Elijah's shoulders, and looked at him with eyes that said, "I see you. I'm here. It's over. Are you okay?" Elijah nodded. He couldn't speak. David turned around. The temperature in the room dropped. "I am David Jackson, Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration." He let that settle. "I have been fully briefed on what has occurred here today, and I am going to need some answers." Whitman's face had gone completely white. "Mr. Jackson, I had no idea he was your—" "That," Jackson said quietly, "is exactly the problem." He stepped closer. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You didn't know whose son he was, so you treated him as a threat. That tells me everything about your judgment, Captain Whitman, and none of it reflects well on you." A FA official stepped forward, tablet in hand. He connected it to the room's large display screen. Security camera footage began to play, crisp, clear, undeniable. Miss Reynolds walking Elijah in, handing him the badge, showing him where to sit. Elijah, alone, watching television. Not moving, not touching anything, just a boy waiting. The footage continued, showing Whitman's entrance, the snatching of the badge, the radio call, the gathering crowd. When it ended, no one in the room spoke. The second FA official stepped forward. "We have also reviewed Captain Whitman's personnel record across FA and Horizon Airlines systems. This is not an isolated incident. Over the past 3 years, at least 3 formal complaints have been filed against Captain Whitman, all documenting discriminatory behavior toward employees and passengers of color. Unfounded accusations, assumptions based on bias, documented harm to innocent individuals." Whitman closed her eyes. Jackson spoke one final time, slowly, so every single person in that room would carry it with them. "The FA does not tolerate discrimination in any form. Our industry is built on trust, professionalism, and the protection of every individual, regardless of their background. What happened to my son today was not a misunderstanding. It was a failure of character." He turned to the officials beside him. "Effective immediately, Captain Rebecca Whitman is suspended from all flight duties pending a full investigation into her conduct and professional ethics." 2 security officers stepped forward. This time, they weren't there for Elijah. What happened after justice? Whitman left the room quietly, each step heavy, each step watched. When she disappeared through the door, the silence she left behind felt different. Not the silence of fear or accusation, but the silence of something finally being set right. Elijah exhaled. His father placed a hand on his back and leaned in close. "I am prouder of you today than I have ever been. Not because you won, because you stood firm when it would have been so easy to fall apart." Before Elijah could respond, another figure stepped forward from the gathered crowd. A woman in a captain's uniform. Black. Poised. Eyes full of something Elijah recognized. The quiet fire of someone who had fought their own battles in this same industry. "I'm Captain Amara Johnson," she said. 20 years flying, and I want to show you something." She led him down the long airport corridor, past the stairs that had turned from suspicion to something closer to shame, past staff who offered quiet apologies, past the world that had tried to diminish him just an hour before. She stopped in front of a Boeing 787. The cockpit door opened. Elijah stepped inside and felt the air leave his lungs. Glowing panels. Hundreds of switches and screens. The windshield looking out onto the runway where planes were already climbing into the sky. Captain Johnson stood beside him. "This is where you belong," she said simply. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." In the weeks that followed, Elijah's story spread. The FA launched nationwide programs targeting young people from underrepresented backgrounds, creating pathways, funding training, dismantling the invisible walls that had quietly kept so many dreams grounded. Elijah became the face of it. He stood in school auditoriums and community centers, looking out at young faces that mirrored his own, full of hunger and uncertainty in equal measure. He told them the truth, that the world would sometimes look at you and see a problem before it sees a person. That prejudice is real, and it hurts, and there is no shame in admitting that. And then he told them the other truth. It does not get to decide your ending. He always closed the same way. The aviation industry, every industry, needs people like you. Your background is not a limitation. It is exactly what makes you necessary. The sky has always been wide enough. The only question is whether you are brave enough to step toward it. The applause that followed was never just applause. It was something more. It was recognition. Young people seeing themselves in a story that had refused to end in defeat. As for Elijah, he went home that night and sat on the edge of his bed. The model planes still hung from the ceiling. The engine diagrams still covered the walls. His father's voice still echoed somewhere warm and certain inside his chest. He looked up at the planes above him, and for the first time in his life, he didn't just see a dream. He saw a destination.